The night was colder than the human expected, the kind of cold that crept into his bones and made his breath turn into small clouds in the air. He had been traveling for hours across the outer rim, looking for a quiet place to rest, when he saw the old station in the distance. He thought it would be empty. The lights were faint, flickering like they were about to die. The doors hung half open, creaking in the wind. Everything about it felt abandoned, silent, forgotten by time. Still, it was better than sleeping outside in the frozen dust. He stepped inside, his boots making soft echoes on the cracked floor. The air was dry and smelled faintly of rust. Broken chairs and metal scraps were scattered across the room. He walked slowly, scanning the shadows. It felt like a place no one had been to for years, yet something about the silence felt strange, like the air was holding its breath. Then he heard it, a sound so faint it could have been the wind, but it wasn't. It was too soft, too careful, almost like someone trying not to be heard. He froze, listening closely. There it was again, a whisper, but the words were unclear. He followed the sound. His footsteps slow and quiet at the far corner of the station, behind a half-collapsed wall. He saw movement, a small shape curled up on the cold floor, shivering. The figure was so still at first he thought it might be a pile of rags, but then it moved, and he saw her. She was tiny, her skin pale with a faint glow that made her look almost fragile. Her hair was messy and tangled, her clothes torn and thin. She hugged her knees to her chest, trying to stay warm. Her hands trembled, and every breath she took came out in sharp, uneven bursts. Her large eyes flicked up at him the moment she realized she was no longer alone. For a moment, neither of them spoke. He could see the fear in her eyes, the way her body tensed as if ready to run, but she didn't move. She only stared at him like she was trying to decide if he was another danger. He raised his hand slowly, showing he wasn't holding any weapon. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said softly. His voice sounded too loud in the empty station. She didn't answer. Her lips moved slightly, but no words came out at first. He took a small step closer, stopping when she flinched. The cold seemed worse near her. He could see how her thin clothes did nothing against the freezing air. Her fingers were so pale they looked almost blue. Something in him shifted. He had met strangers before, even dangerous ones. But this was different. This was a child. Alone, freezing, and terrified. Finally, her voice broke the silence. It was so quiet he had to lean closer to hear. "Please, don't leave me alone tonight," she whispered. Her voice carried a weight he couldn't ignore. It wasn't just fear of the cold. It was fear of something else. Something worse. Those 6 words lodged themselves deep inside him. He didn't know her name, didn't know where she came from. He didn't even know if helping her would bring him trouble. But something in her voice made it impossible for him to walk away. He crouched down slowly, so they were at eye level. "I won't," he said. The words left his mouth before he even thought about them. She blinked at him, as if she hadn't expected him to agree so easily, up close. He could see more details, faint marks on her arms, thin scars along her wrists. Like she had been tied or grabbed too hard. Her cheeks were hollow, and she looked like she hadn't eaten in days. The thought made his chest tighten. He glanced around the cold, broken station. It wasn't safe here. Not for her. He knew he had to get her somewhere warmer, but the night was too dangerous to travel, for now. The best he could do was make a small camp inside the most sheltered part of the building. He took off his pack and pulled out a small heater. Setting it on the floor between them, the soft glow lit her face, and for the first time he saw her. Shoulders relaxed just a little. He removed his outer jacket and placed it over her thin frame. She held it tightly, as though afraid it might vanish. They sat in silence for a while, the only sounds being the hum of the heater and the soft whistle of the wind outside. Every now and then she glanced at him as if making sure he was still there. Each time, he gave her a small nod, letting her know she wasn't alone. He didn't ask her who she was or what had happened. Not yet. He could tell that whatever she had been through was heavy, and pushing her to speak now would only make her retreat. Instead, he focused on keeping her warm, keeping her safe, at least for this one night. The station still felt eerie, like something unseen was watching from the shadows, but he stayed. Close to her, ready to protect her if anything came. She shifted a little, curling under his jacket, and for a brief moment, he saw her eyes close. Not in fear, but in exhaustion, the human leaned back against the wall. Listening to the wind howl outside, he didn't know why he had stopped here tonight, or why he had chosen to follow the sound into the dark corner of the station. But now, looking at her small form huddled beside him, he knew he couldn't imagine leaving her behind. And as the cold night stretched on, he silently made a promise to himself. He would keep her safe until morning, no matter what it took. He led her carefully through the empty station, choosing a corner where the walls were less broken and the wind could not reach so easily. His small camp was set up inside an old cargo bay. It wasn't much, just a heater, a few blankets, and a metal box he used as a seat. But compared to the freezing floor she had been lying on, it was warmer and safer. He told her to sit near the heater while he checked his pack. She sat quietly, her knees still pulled up to her chest. Her large eyes never stopped moving, glancing at the door, at the shadows, at him. She was still tense, still ready to run if she had to. He noticed how she kept flinching at sudden creaks from the old metal walls. He unrolled a spare blanket and gently placed it around her shoulders. She didn't resist, but she didn't thank him either. Instead, she kept her gaze low. Her hands gripped the edges of the blanket like she was afraid someone might pull it away from her. After a moment, she asked a question in a low voice. "Will they find me here?" He paused, not sure what to say. He didn't know who they were yet. But the fear in her tone made him understand one thing. She had been running from someone dangerous. He asked softly, "Who are you talking about?" But she didn't answer. Instead, she looked away. Biting her lip, he didn't press her. She would speak when she felt safe enough. For now, he decided to keep her mind on something else. He opened a small container of food and handed it to her. It wasn't much, just warmed rations, but the moment she smelled it, he saw her eyes change. She reached for it quickly, but her hands shook so much that the spoon almost slipped from her fingers. She tried to eat slowly, but her hunger was too strong. He noticed how thin she was, how her wrists looked fragile, like they could break if he held them too tightly. Each bite she took seemed to give her a little more life. Her cheeks still looked hollow, but her eyes no longer had that empty, faraway look. After a few minutes, she put the spoon down and whispered, "Thank you." It was so quiet he almost didn't hear it. He just nodded, not wanting to make her feel uncomfortable. The heater hummed softly, filling the small space with a steady warmth. Outside, the wind rattled the old walls, but in here, the air was. For the first time since he had found her, her shoulders dropped slightly. It's as if she was allowing herself to rest. Still, there was something in the way she kept glancing at the shadows, as if expecting them to move. He could tell she wasn't just afraid of the cold. She was afraid of being seen, of being found. He decided to stay close and keep watch. They sat in silence for a while. He could feel her studying him now and then, maybe trying to figure out why he was helping her. She didn't know him, didn't owe him anything. And yet here he was, giving her food, warmth, and protection. Finally, she spoke again, her voice even softer than before. "I didn't think anyone would stop." Her words were strange, like she had been calling for help for a long time, but no one had answered. He wondered how many people had walked past her before. Pretending not to see, he told her, "I couldn't leave you out there," and meant it. She didn't smile, but he thought he saw a small spark in her eyes. Like maybe she was starting to believe him. He reached into his pack and pulled out a small metal flask. Offering her water, she drank in small sips, holding the flask carefully. Her hands were still trembling. But he could tell the warmth and food were beginning to help. Outside, the wind howled again, and the station made a loud, groaning sound. She jumped at the noise, looking toward the doorway. He said quietly, "It's just the wind," but she didn't look convinced. He wondered what kind of life she had before this. What could have left someone so young in such a state? He imagined she must have been through things no one her age should face. That thought sat heavily in his chest. The heater's light flickered across her face, and for the first time, she looked less like a stranger and more like someone he was responsible for. He didn't know how long she would stay with him, or if they'd even see morning without trouble. But he knew one thing. He wasn't going to let her spend the night alone in the dark. Cold and afraid, she shifted under the blanket. Sitting a little closer to the heater, the faint glow made her look warmer. But the fear still lingered in her eyes. As the hours stretched on, he stayed awake, listening to the wind, watching the door, and making sure she stayed safe. It was a quiet night. But not peaceful. Somewhere out there, he knew. The ones she feared were searching, and if they came here, they would find a human standing between them and the small, trembling girl who had asked him for just one thing, not to leave her alone. Tonight, the heater kept a soft glow between them, and the girl sat with the blanket wrapped tightly around her small frame. For a long time, she said nothing, her eyes fixed on the floor. He could tell she was thinking. Maybe deciding if she could trust him. He didn't push her. He simply sat nearby, pretending to focus on checking his gear while keeping his ears open. After a while, her voice broke the silence. It was so quiet, he almost missed it. "They took me," she said. He lifted his head, waiting for her to go on. Her fingers twisted the edge of the blanket. "The traitors," she added. Her voice shook when she said that word, like it was something poisonous. She told him that the traitors were not merchants like normal people. They were cruel beings who stole people from their homes. They went to small villages on the outer rim, capturing the weak, the young, the ones who could not fight back. Then they sold them in markets across the galaxy. Some became workers, others. She stopped talking for a moment, her lips pressing together. She didn't need to explain. The look in her eyes said, "Enough." She told him she had been taken months ago. She didn't remember exactly how long. The days blurred together in the dark cage where they kept her. The place was cold. The food was barely enough to keep her alive. She said there were others like her, but one by one, they were taken away and never came back. He listened in silence. His hands were clenched without him realizing it. Every detail she gave made him more certain that she had suffered more than anyone her age should. She told him she had managed to escape only because the traitors became careless. There was a storm one night, and in the chaos, she slipped away. Through a broken panel in the wall of the holding area, she ran without stopping. Without looking back, she had no idea where she was going, only that she had to get as far away from them as possible. For days, she hid in abandoned places, living off scraps, always listening for footsteps or voices. She never stayed in the same spot for long, but this time, she had made a mistake. She thought the old station was safe. She thought no one came here, but earlier that day, before he arrived, she had seen shadows moving in the distance, and she was sure they were looking for her. Her voice trembled as she admitted she didn't think she could run anymore. Her legs were weak, her body was tired, and the cold made everything worse. She said she had been sitting in that dark corner when she heard his footsteps. At first, she thought it was them. But when she saw him, she realized he wasn't one of them still. She almost didn't speak. She almost let him walk past, but something inside her told her to try one more time, to ask for help. He didn't speak right away. He needed a moment to control the anger building in his chest. He didn't know these traitors, but the way she described them was enough to make him want to find them and end their cruelty. He looked at her and said firmly, "They're not taking you again." She blinked at him like she didn't believe it. She asked him why he cared. He could see she was used to people ignoring her, to people looking the other way. He told her simply, "Because no one should be alone in a place like this." He didn't tell her the other truth, that something about her reminded him of the people he had failed to protect before. And he wasn't going to make the same mistake now. She pulled the blanket tighter and stared at the heater's light. Her breathing slowed a little, like she was calming down, but the fear was still there, deep in her eyes. He understood that no words could erase it overnight. Trust would take time. He thought about leaving at first light. But he knew the traitors wouldn't stop. If they were already close, they might find this place by morning. That meant they needed a plan. He didn't tell her yet. Not wanting to scare her more, for now, it was enough that she was warm and safe for the night. The wind outside howled again, making the metal walls creak. She flinched at the sound. He leaned forward slightly and said, "It's just the wind. I'm here." She gave the smallest nod, as if she wanted to believe him. They sat in silence again, but this time, it felt different. It wasn't the cold, distant silence from before. This one felt like a pause, like both of them were trying to gather strength. He kept his eyes on the doorway, his ears tuned for any sound that didn't belong. She stayed close to the heater, her eyes half closed, still alert, but too tired to move much. He thought about what she had told him, and every part of him knew. He couldn't let her go alone. The traitors were dangerous, but so was the galaxy. She would last maybe a day without shelter. Maybe less. No. If he was going to leave this place, she was coming with him in that moment. He made a silent promise, not just to keep her safe tonight, but for as long as she needed. He didn't know where they would go. He didn't know how many enemies might come after them, but he knew that walking away was not an option. As the heater's light flickered and the night grew colder, he stayed awake, listening to every sound, keeping watch. The girl stayed curled under the blanket, and though she didn't say it, he thought he saw a little less fear in her eyes when she glanced his way. And that, to him, was enough to know he was doing the right thing. The night grew even colder. The kind of cold that made the walls of the station groan every time the wind pushed against them. The heater gave off a dim orange glow, casting long shadows across the cracked metal floor. The girl sat close to it, wrapped in the blanket, but she wasn't sleeping. Her eyes kept flicking toward the door, as if she felt something moving outside. The human noticed it too, a strange tension in the air. At first, he thought it was only the wind. But then there was a sound that didn't belong. It was faint, slow, deliberate. A heavy footstep echoed somewhere in the distance. The girl froze instantly, her breathing going sharp. Her small hands gripped the blanket tighter, and she looked at him with wide, frightened eyes. He raised a finger to his lips, telling her without words to stay quiet. He listened carefully. The sound came again, another step, and then another. This was not the creak of the building, or the shifting of the wind. This was someone moving inside the station, someone trying not to be heard, but failing. Her fear told him the truth before she even whispered it. "It's them," she mouthed, barely moving her lips. He didn't need to ask who she meant. The traitors had found this place. He stood slowly, every muscle ready. His hand went to the small weapon at his side. He didn't want to fight in such a cramped space. Not with her here, but if it came to that, he would. He stepped toward the entrance of the cargo bay, careful not to make noise. The sound of footsteps grew louder. A faint metallic scrape followed, like a boot sliding on the floor. The human pressed his back to the wall. Listening, the girl's eyes followed him, her body stiff with terror. He could almost hear her heartbeat in the quiet. Then a shadow moved across the doorway. The figure was tall, broad-shouldered, wrapped in dark armor that caught the faint light. The man stopped just outside, his voice deep and cold, hand over the girl. "And you walk away alive." The human said nothing. His silence was his answer. The stranger took a step inside, the floor creaking under his weight from the corner of his eye. The human saw the girl pull the blanket tighter around herself, as if it could make her disappear. The man in armor tilted his head slightly. "You don't want trouble, human," he said, "but if you make this hard, you won't live to regret it." His voice carried the kind of confidence that came from knowing he was armed and dangerous. Still, the human didn't move. He knew if he let them take her now, she was as good as dead. He also knew there was no talking his way out of this. The only choice was to fight. In one swift motion, he stepped out from the wall and struck. The armored man staggered back, caught off guard, but recovered quickly. The sound of fists hitting armor echoed through the cold hall. The human moved fast, aiming for weak spots. The joints, the neck. The man swung back, the clash of metal and bone filling the air. The girl stayed frozen in place, her eyes locked on the fight. She wanted to scream, but no sound came out. Her whole body shook, not from the cold this time, but from the fear that the only person protecting her might not win. The human pushed forward, driving the man back toward the door. A final strike knocked him to the floor. His weapon clattered away into the shadows. The human didn't wait for him to recover. He turned, grabbed the girl's hand, and pulled her toward the back of the station. Her bare feet slapped against the cold floor as they ran. The sounds of more boots echoed behind them. The first man hadn't been alone. Shadows stretched along the walls, growing longer as more figures entered the station. The girl's breathing was quick and shallow, every step feeling like it would be her last. The human kept his grip firm, pulling her through narrow corridors, past broken machinery and fallen beams. He knew the layout from a quick scan earlier, and he headed for the maintenance tunnels. Small, cramped passages the traders might not know about. They reached a rusted hatch. He shoved it open and guided her inside. The tunnel was barely wide enough for her to crawl. "Stay here. Don't make a sound," he whispered. His voice was calm, but his eyes told her he meant every word. She hesitated, her fingers gripping his sleeve. She didn't want him to go back, didn't want him to face them alone. But he gave her a small nod, a silent promise. Then he pulled the hatch closed, leaving her in the dim darkness. Outside, he turned back to Ward. The sound of approaching footsteps. He could hear voices, now rough, sharp, speaking in a language he didn't know but understood well enough. They were hunting, and they thought they had already trapped their prey. He let them believe it, moving silently into the shadows. His breath was steady, his mind focused. He knew he had to stop them before they reached her hiding place. The cold didn't matter anymore. The danger didn't matter either. The only thing that mattered was keeping her safe. In the dark, the station felt like a different world, filled with echoes and flickers of movement. The human shadow merged with the walls as he prepared for the next fight. Somewhere nearby, the girl crouched alone in the tunnel, clutching the blanket to her chest, her ears straining for any sound that would tell her if he was still alive. And the night that had started in silence was now holding its breath, waiting to see who would survive until morning. The first attacker was already down, groaning on the cold floor, but there was no time to rest. More footsteps echoed from the hallway, heavier and faster this time. The human knew they were closing in, and they wouldn't make the same mistake twice. He tightened his grip on his weapon, his breath turning into steam in the icy air. His body was tired from the first fight, but he pushed that feeling aside. The girl was hidden in the maintenance tunnel behind the hatch. He could still picture her small hands gripping the blanket, her wide eyes watching him before he shut the door. That memory kept him moving. If they reached her, she wouldn't stand a chance. He had to make sure they never got close. Two shadows appeared at the far end of the frozen hall. Their boots clanged against the metal floor, sending sharp echoes bouncing off the walls. One of them carried a blade that glinted in the dim light. The other held a short blaster. The human's eyes locked on the man with the blaster. He knew that would be the bigger problem. Before they could take aim, he sprinted forward, his feet pounding against the floor. The sudden movement startled them. The one with the blade stepped in front, trying to block his path. The human ducked low, sweeping his leg out and knocking the man off balance. The blade clattered away, spinning across the floor. The one with the blaster raised his weapon, but the human was already moving. He slammed into him with enough force to send them both crashing into the wall. The impact made the blaster slip from his hands. The human grabbed it before it could hit the ground and sent it sliding far down the corridor. Out of reach, the blade wielder was back on his feet now, rushing forward with a roar. The human caught his arm, twisted it, and shoved him hard against the wall. The sound of bone meeting metal rang out, and the man crumpled to the floor, groaning in pain. But there was no pause. More voices echoed from deeper inside the station. They were shouting orders to one another. Their tone was sharp and confident. As if they believed this was only a matter of time, the human knew there were too many to fight all at once. He had to keep moving, hit fast, and disappear before they could surround him. He stepped over the fallen men and moved quickly down the frozen hall. His boots left faint marks in the thin layer of frost on the floor. His breath stayed steady, his ears stayed sharp. Every sound could be a clue. The scrape of a boot, the click of a weapon, the shift of weight before a strike. At the next junction, another traitor appeared, this one taller. Wearing heavier armor that covered most of his body, the man charged without hesitation. Swinging a thick metal rod, the human barely dodged the first swing, feeling the rush of air as the weapon passed. Close to his head, the second swing came faster, but he caught the rod with both hands, twisting hard until the traitor lost his grip. With the rod now in his hands, the human struck, driving the man back with quick, precise blows. The armor protected most of him, but the human aimed for the joints, the knees, the elbows, the neck. Each strike landed with a dull thud, forcing the traitor to retreat step by step until he stumbled against the wall. A final hit to the side of the helmet sent him collapsing to the floor, unmoving. The hall fell quiet again for a moment. But it was a tense quiet. The human knew more were coming. He couldn't stay in one place. If they surrounded him, the fight would be over. He moved quickly toward another side passage, staying low, listening for the sound of pursuit. Somewhere behind him, he heard the first man groan again. He knew they wouldn't stay down forever. Pain and cold could slow a person. But fear and orders from someone cruel could make them get back up. That meant he had to end this before they regrouped. He turned a corner and came face to face with two more. They looked younger than the others, but no less dangerous. One of them lunged forward, trying to grab him. The human sidestepped, catching his arm and pulling him forward before slamming him into the wall. The other swung at him with a short blade, but the human blocked it with the metal rod, the clash sending vibrations up his arm with a sharp twist. He sent the blade flying and followed with a strike to the attacker's stomach. The man doubled over, gasping for air. The human didn't wait for him to recover. He knocked him down and turned back to the first, who was already scrambling away. He let him go, knowing chasing him would waste time. The cold air bit at his skin, and his breath came faster now, but he forced himself to keep moving. Each fight left him more tired. But the thought of the girl alone in the dark tunnel kept his legs moving. He had promised she would be safe. And promises were not made to be broken. The station seemed to shift around him, shadows lengthening, the air growing heavier. He could still hear movement in the distance, but it was less certain now. The traitors had come in, loud and confident. But the echoes of their fallen men were changing the mood. Maybe, he thought, they were beginning. To doubt if this was worth it, he slowed his pace, listening. His eyes scanned the corridor ahead. Every doorway and broken panel a possible hiding place for another attacker. But for now, there was only the sound of the wind outside and the faint hum of the heater somewhere far behind him. Somewhere in the quiet, he knew the girl was still curled in that tunnel, clutching the blanket, waiting for him. She didn't know how many he had faced, or how close they had come. And she didn't need to know. All that mattered was that when this night ended, she would still be safe. And so, gripping the rod tightly, he moved deeper into the frozen station, ready for whoever dared to come next. His breathing was heavy. Now, the kind that came from fighting too long without rest. The station was quiet again, but it was the kind of quiet that felt uncertain. Like it was waiting to see if danger would return. He moved through the corridors carefully, stepping over the bodies of the traitors he had left behind. Some of them groaned softly, injured but still alive. Others stayed still, knocked out cold. He didn't stop to check. His mind was on one thing only, getting back to her. The path to the maintenance tunnel felt longer than before. Every sound made him tighten his grip on the metal rod still. In his hand, he couldn't shake the thought that one of the traitors might have found her hiding place. He pictured her small body huddled in the dark, gripping the blanket, listening to the chaos outside. That thought made him walk faster. When he reached the hatch, he tapped it lightly. "It's me," he whispered, for a moment. There was no sound from inside. Then, slowly, the hatch creaked open. Two wide eyes peeked out from the darkness when she saw him. Her face changed, the tension in her expression broke, and tears filled her eyes. She crawled out quickly, clutching the blanket like it was her only shield, without saying a word. She threw herself into his arms. Her small frame trembled against him. He could feel how cold she still was, even after being near the heater earlier. He wrapped his arms around her. Holding her tight, his chest ached, not from the fight, but from the way she clung to him like he was the only safe thing left in her world. "I'm here," he said quietly. His voice was steady, but inside. He felt something heavy, the weight of knowing how close she had been to being taken again. She didn't answer right away. Her face was buried against his jacket, and he could feel the warmth of her breath, uneven and shaky, when she finally spoke. Her voice was so small, he almost didn't hear it. "I thought you weren't coming." Back. The words cut through him. He pulled back just enough to look at her. Her cheeks were streaked with tears, her lips trembling. "I told you," he said firmly. "I'm not leaving you. Not tonight. Not ever." The words left his mouth before he could even think about them, but they felt true. She searched his face for a moment, as if trying to see if he meant it. When she saw no hesitation in his eyes, her shoulders loosened, and a tiny breath of relief escaped her. He guided her back toward the cargo bay, keeping his arm around her. The heater's faint light welcomed them as they stepped inside. He set the metal rod down and sat beside her. Letting her stay close, she didn't move away. In fact, she leaned into him, as though she wanted to make sure he didn't disappear again. The station groaned softly under the wind outside, but inside, the air felt warmer now. She sat quietly for a while, staring into the glow of the heater. He could see that the fear in her eyes hadn't completely gone, but it wasn't as sharp. As before, something in her had shifted, not trust fully, but the first step toward it. Her small hand rested on the sleeve of his jacket, not gripping tightly, just staying there, as if she needed to feel that he was real. He didn't move it away. The touch was so light he might not have noticed it if he wasn't paying attention. But it said more than words could. After a few minutes, she asked in a hesitant voice, "Will they come back?" He didn't want to lie, but he also didn't want to scare her more. Maybe, he admitted, but if they do, they'll have to get through me first. She didn't smile, but her lips softened slightly, like she was holding back a response. He reached into his pack and handed her another small portion of food. She ate slowly this time, no longer rushing. Every bite seemed to calm her a little more. He took a sip from his own flask of water, his eyes never leaving the doorway. Time passed slowly, but not in the tense way it had before. Now, it felt like the night was holding them in a small bubble of warmth and quiet. He knew they couldn't stay here forever. In the morning, they would have to move, to put as much distance as possible between them and the traders. But for now, she was safe, and that was enough. At some point, her head began to lean against his arm, her eyes fluttered, fighting to stay open, but the exhaustion was too strong. Soon, her breathing slowed, and she drifted into sleep, still. Her hand stayed on his sleeve, as though even in dreams she didn't want to let go. He watched her for a long time, making sure she stayed warm. The blanket was wrapped tightly around her, and the heater's light painted her face in soft shadows. She looked younger when she slept, the lines of fear easing from her features. But he knew those fears would return the moment she woke, unless he could keep her away from the people. Who caused them? He leaned back against the wall, keeping his ears open for any sign of movement outside. His body ached from the fights, his muscles sore. But he didn't let himself relax too much. Not until morning would he feel it was safe to rest. Still, there was something about the quiet moment that stayed with him. The way she had run into his arms without hesitation, the way she had held on as though she believed he could stop anything. It had been a long time since anyone had looked at him like that, and he realized it was a responsibility he was willing to carry. The wind outside rattled the station again, but he didn't flinch. She was here, beside him, and he had given his word he would not let her face another night alone. Morning came slowly. The kind of morning where the light felt weak, as if the sun itself was tired. A pale glow slipped through the cracks in the station walls, cutting thin lines across the floor. The cold was still there, biting at the air. But it felt softer than the sharp chill of the night before. The human was still awake, sitting against the wall. Watching the small figure beside him sleep, the girl was curled under the blanket, her breathing steady now. Her small hand was still resting against his sleeve, just as it had been when she fell asleep. It was as if her body refused to let go of the one thing that made her feel safe. He stayed. Still not wanting to wake her, he knew she needed rest more than anything. After some time, she stirred, her eyes blinking open slowly. At first, she looked confused, as if she had forgotten where she was. Then she saw him, and the fear that had flickered in her expression softened into something calmer. She sat up slowly, pulling the blanket around her shoulders. The cold made her shiver again, but it wasn't as violent as before. "You didn't leave," she whispered, her voice still rough from sleep. He shook his head. "I told you I wouldn't." She looked at him for a moment longer, then gave the smallest nod. It wasn't a smile, but it felt like a step toward trust. He began packing his things, moving with quiet efficiency. He didn't want to stay here any longer than necessary. The traders might have pulled back for the night, but that didn't mean they were gone. "We can't stay," he told her gently. "They might come back." She didn't argue, but he could see a flicker of worry in her eyes, as if the idea of stepping back into the outside world was just another kind of danger. He handed her a small piece of food, and she ate it slowly. Sitting close to the heater one last time, he filled her flask with the last of his water, slipping it into her hands. "Keep this with you," he said. She nodded without speaking. When they were ready, he stepped toward the doorway and scanned the corridors outside. The station was silent, only the faint sound of the wind moving through the broken walls. The bodies of the traders he had fought the night before were gone. He didn't like that. It meant someone had dragged them away, and someone might be watching. He turned back to her, holding out his hand. She looked at it for a moment before, placing her smaller hand in his. It was cold but firm. She stood, wrapping the blanket tighter around herself. The two of them stepped out of the cargo bay together. The corridors felt different in the daylight. The shadows were less threatening, but the emptiness was still there. The metal walls groaned under the wind, and patches of frost clung stubbornly to the floor. The human led the way, his eyes constantly scanning for movement. She followed closely, her steps light and careful. When they reached the main entrance, the cold wind hit them full force. It cut against their faces, but compared to the night before, it felt almost manageable. The land outside stretched wide and empty, the pale light making the frozen ground shimmer faintly. In the distance, the wide lies time. The remains of old structures stood like skeletons. Silent and broken, she looked up at him, her voice barely above the wind. "Where will we go?" He paused, then answered, "Somewhere far from here, somewhere safe." She seemed to think about that for a moment, then gave a small nod, as if that was enough for now. They began walking, their steps crunching over the frozen ground. The station grew smaller behind them with each step. The girl glanced back once, then turned her eyes forward. The human noticed and understood that place had been a prison of cold and fear. But it had also been where she found someone who stayed. The wind carried the faint sound of something far away, maybe the traders, maybe just the shifting of the land. Either way, he didn't slow his pace. He kept her close, his hand never letting go of hers. She didn't try to pull away. As they moved through the empty land, he thought about the promise he had made. It hadn't been planned, it had simply come out. But now it felt like a part of him, something he couldn't and wouldn't break. He didn't know how long this journey would be or what dangers waited ahead, but he knew he would face them. The pale morning light caught her face, and for the first time, he thought he saw the hint of a smile. It was small, almost hidden, but it was there. And in that moment, he knew they would keep moving. No matter how far they had to go, somewhere behind them, the station stood in silence, holding the memory of the night when she asked him not to leave, and he kept his word. Ahead of them lay an uncertain path, but at least they would walk it together, and as long as they were together, she would never have to spend another night alone in the cold.